Hi, and welcome to the SV Lynx channel. I'm Admiral Marianne. Let's briefly bring you up to speed on where we're at in our goal to build a catamaran.
I'm Captain Blood, and with my permanent crew of my wife and good friend Brian, as well as some part-time crew, including my sister Rhonda and cousin Todd, we're building a 50-foot performance cruising catamaran named SV Lynx. We plan to sail her on a double circumnavigation of planet Earth and video document the entire build and voyage on YouTube.
At this point, we've finished the design phase where we collaborated with Schionning Designs to create a new model that meets all our needs, and they've named it the Solitaire 1520.
Just in case you're interested in building or having a Schionning boat built for you, please contact us and we'll get you in touch with the right people at Schionning and give you some insights on the process we went through in building our kit boat. Now, in full disclosure, recently, because we collaborated on the design of this model and are making videos about the construction process, Schionning has offered to give us a small fee for each boat they sell through our channel. So, if you email us before talking to Schionning, we get a small finder's fee for our efforts. Now, we paid thousands extra for the engineering cost to create this new model, so this small fee that we earn will help us recoup part of that additional cost that we had to pay, and it costs you nothing extra.
The good news for you is that anyone who buys the kit now won't have to pay the extra fee since we already paid for the engineering changes.
Once we agreed that the design was locked down, we purchased our kit. It has now been CNC cut by Advanced Material Solutions in South Africa and loaded onto a shipping container due to depart from South Africa in a few days. We've also purchased most of the major systems that will be on board, like sails, rigging lines, etc. And much of that is also coming in the shipping container.
We're currently in the preparation phase as we prepare the build site, tools, and other equipment to help us assemble our catamaran. The shipping container with our kit is due to arrive in early April 2023, and that's when we'll begin construction. We hope to finish our Solitaire 1520 by the end of 2024.
So that's where we stand at the time this video was shot. Currently, we have 3 months before our kit makes its way across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. We're using that time to get things ready for the boat construction, like building our positive pressure respirators for use while sanding, our cyclone dust separator unit on a mobile cart, and some other items. We're also preparing Traveler, our convertible electric tender dinghy, since things we wanted required a lot of custom work, so we decided to get that work completed while we had to wait for the kit to reach California. As part of that preparation, we need to do some work on the build site before we can construct our 50-foot, 26-foot wide catamaran.
There will be videos about most of these subjects coming up in the next couple months. However, for today, while we're getting through the holiday period between Christmas and New Year, we thought we would take some time to show you some of our future plans about circumnavigating the planet by sailboat.
While we show you the first-year route, we will be finishing up modifications to our electric outboard that we're using when Traveler's in her tender configuration. We have one last part to finish, the fiberglassing of the cowl, to make it fit over the electronics we added on the top of the electric motor.
If you're interested in watching what we did to modify this 18 kilowatt electric outboard, watch the 2 top 25 videos we made about that. Here's a link to part 1. Those 2 videos will bring you up to the point where we finished electric motor modifications, all except for fiberglassing the cowl.
Unfortunately, for the past few weeks, the weather in Southern California has turned cold, so we couldn't cure fiberglass. However, we're getting a pair of nice 70 to 80 degree days this week, so it's time to get that fiberglassing done.
If you remember, we cut the cowl in half, and now we must add a fiberglass section of wall between the top and bottom. That will raise the front of the cowl by 3 inches and the back by 6 inches.
As you can see, we used some aluminum flashing to hold the 2 parts of the cowl at their proper heights. To do that, I added some pads on top of the motor, then set the cowl on it, and then just duct tape the flashing to the cowl. Here it is, ready to fiberglass. Next up, I must add fiberglass layers from the inside, which will rest against the flashing. I can fill in the small gaps at the corners with fairing compound tomorrow after the resin sets up.
So, while Phil cuts the fiberglass cloth, wets it out, and applies it to the inside of the cowl, let's talk about the first year of our future voyage around the world. As we mentioned in our last video about Santa's hybrid sleigh fuel tanks, though it may seem premature for us to be planning routes when we haven't built the boat yet, we need motivation to keep going. We get some of that motivation by dreaming of where we'll take the boat and planning out some of the possible routes we may sail as we take our Performance Cruising Cat around the planet.
So today, we're going to share the plans for the sea trials and the first year of our currently planned route. But before we get started, let's roll the SV Lynx logo animation. As you can see, we decided to wet out 3 layers of fiberglass cloth with a polyester resin and applied those all at once to the inside of the cowl in the gap between the top and bottom. Then we will roll on another couple of layers that overlap the cowl and new fiberglass layers. We plan to do all the layers of the fiberglass wet before any of it sets up.
While he does that, let's chat about the first year of our possible route. But before we get into the details of the route, we have a quick disclaimer. We're not planning on sailing SV Lynx to a schedule. That's for folk who are willing to risk breaking their boat and comfort of the crew. Though we plan routes ahead of time, they're just to get an idea of where we might like to go.
This allows us to plan the best time of year to be in any given region, based off of yearly weather patterns and some other factors. But when it comes to truly sailing the route, weather will dictate when we sail and how long we stay in locations. Sometimes weather will change the route completely. Besides weather, there are other things that affect the route, like the boat breaking down, changes in politics, pandemics, increased pirate activity, or if we just decide to stay somewhere longer because we like it there.
And though we have a whole bunch of possible routes figured out, let's look at our current favorite one.
SV Lynx will splash in California, simply because that's where we're building our catamaran. Before we head out around the world, we need to do some sea trials around the local islands of Southern California. These trips will be in ever-increasing lengths as we shake down the systems on board and make adjustments whenever we find an issue that needs resolving.
Assuming she isn't taking on water when we splash, we'll disconnect from the crane and then motor SV Lynx about 2 miles to a guest mooring area in Newport Beach. For the next couple of days, we'll putt around Newport Harbor and test out the electric and diesel motor systems.
If all looks good, in about 3 days we'll motor her up the coast to San Pedro, to the dock that will be her home base while we conduct her sea trials. Newport Beach takes over an hour just to get out of the harbor, so we want to move to San Pedro so that we can hit the ocean in 10 minutes.
Our first ocean voyage away from land will be to cross the 26 miles from San Pedro to Santa Catalina Island. We'll stay overnight at a mooring ball in Avalon, then motor or sail up the east coast of the island to Twin Harbors. We'll stay the night there and then sail back across to San Pedro.
Next up, we will take SV Lynx on several more outings, going to various other local islands such as Santa Barbara, San Clemente, and San Nicolas. Each of these voyages will be longer than the previous one.
If SV Lynx comes through all those sea trials without any major issues, we'll be ready for her first big test.
For that, we plan to take her on a difficult and long sail going up the coast to San Francisco, then inland to Sacramento, the capital of California. This trip will test the boat and crew, since we will be going upwind against the waves, which can sometimes make for harsh conditions. Since we eventually intend to sail SV Lynx in some difficult seas like the North Sea of Europe, the Tasman Sea of Australia, and possibly the Bering Sea of Alaska, we need to make sure she's ready and capable before we head out on such a voyage around the world.
Once we reach San Francisco, we'll head inland for the next leg of this month-long sea trial. This part of the voyage is to test her motors going up estuaries, rivers, and canals. We need to do this because we plan to sail the 2 loops, the European Loop and the Great Loop of the United States. Both use inland rivers, canals, and lakes.
Once we return to San Francisco Bay, we'll reverse course and sail the easier downwind route back to Southern California. Once back in San Pedro, we'll make any needed upgrades or modifications. Assuming all is well, and nothing major was discovered,
We will start preparing for our departure on our circumnavigation year 1.
One of the things we'll prepare before we depart is the 6 to 8 weeks it takes to get a long-stay visa set up for French Polynesia. We need to apply for that at the French consulate in Los Angeles. Fortunately, we can do that locally before we depart. It must be done no more than 90 days before the start of the visa, but that works out for our trip perfectly.
With visa in hand, we will depart from San Pedro. Our first 3 stops will be at local places for bon voyage parties. We plan to take a lot of guests with us on these day sails since our friends, family, and possibly Patron crew members may sail with us for the first of these short legs in Southern California. Yet, get off the boat still close to home and in the USA. The stops will be in Newport Beach, Dana Point, and Mission Bay, San Diego. That city sits right on the border of Mexico.
After our final bon voyage party, we'll set sail south down the coast of Baja, headed for Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. This passage will take place just after the New Year 2025, when the weather is nice and hurricanes don't sweep up from the south along the west coast of Baja.
Everything about our route planning has to do with not being in places when hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons typically form in that region.
On our way down the Baja Peninsula, if any of our part-time crew wish to join us on this first leg of the voyage, we have room to sleep up to 13 people on SV Lynx.
On reaching Cabo San Lucas, we will turn north again and enter the Sea of Cortez for a few weeks to do some scuba diving. After completing the loop you see here, we will arrive back at the mouth of the Sea of Cortez and stop in Puerto Vallarta to provision for our first major ocean crossing into the South Pacific. That voyage will take us across the equator, where we will all be changing from polywogs to shellbacks with the appropriate ceremonies.
According to reports, the best time of year to cross from Mexico is in March, when the winds have a bit of southeast flow, before the trades build up to winter strength and blow more from the east. Our plan is to leave the shore of Mexico by the end of March. On the passage, we'll use weather data we download to try and help us head for the narrowest portion of the doldrums. However, we may have to give in to the angle of the wind and cross where we must.
Regardless of where we cross the doldrums, once the wind drops, we will turn on our motors or engine and motor swiftly at 8 to 10 knots. That's another advantage of a performance catamaran. According to Schionning, our 1520 will motor as fast as 12 knots. That should cut our time exposed to possible thunderstorms to a minimum and get us back to sailing, taking, hopefully, no more than a couple of days. However, we will detour around any thunderstorms if necessary. We'd rather motor longer than take the chance of getting hit by lightning.
Once we pick up wind again on the other side, we'll continue to sail south for a bit until we can turn and get the wind behind us for a more comfortable ride the rest of the way to the Marquesas Islands.
All total, we expect the crossing to be as short as 15 days and no more than 18. Again, due to our Performance Cat speed. That's only figuring an average speed of 8 knots. We're basing that on reports from other performance catamaran owners who average 8.5 knots on long passages. So we think that figuring 8 knots is a reasonable expectation for our average speed.
The South Pacific tropical cyclone season is typically from November 1st to April 30th, so the objective for us is to reach the Marquesas in mid-April. The Marquesas are very safe from cyclones, as you can see from this track of all cyclones. In all recorded history, no cyclone has ever hit the Marquesas Islands. Therefore, it is statistically safe enough for us to arrive there mid-April and leave 4 weeks later after April 30th, headed for the Tuamotu Atolls.
Even though we aren't going there in what is considered cyclone season, the Tuamotu Atolls are also rarely hit by cyclones, as you can see from that same storm track image.
On arriving at the wonderful and beautiful Marquesas Islands of French Polynesia, we'll take a month to enjoy their wonders. We're in no hurry since we all have long-stay visas. We'll arrive in the Marquesas Islands around mid-April, leave mid-May headed for the eastern Tuamotu Atolls.
On arriving at Raiatea Atoll, which is a 470-mile passage which should only take us a little over 2.5 days, we will spend a few days diving the atoll. When the weather permits, we will haul up anchor and sail further south to Heo Atoll, again spending about 5 days diving the atoll's reefs. We may make one more stop at Nukutavake Atoll, if possible. Since that atoll does not have a cut in the reef leading into the inner lagoon, weather or rough seas may force us to skip that stop unless we hit a calm day.
Our next destination is the Gambier Islands of French Polynesia. Just to note, we departed from the typical milk run when we didn't continue west to the Society Islands. We want to visit the more southerly and less traveled Gambier Islands on our South Pacific adventure.
For this part of the passage, we must stay far east of Mururoa Atoll, which the French used as a nuclear test site, and the radiation can still be an issue. The first island we will visit in the Gambiers
is the Maratea Atoll.
Like Nutukavaki, we may not stay unless the weather is very calm since there's no cut in the reef. For there we head for Mangariva, which is the central and largest of the Gambier Islands. We plan to stay a couple of weeks to enjoy the 15 square kilometer island, which is 56% of the total landmass of the Gambier Islands combined.
On departing from Mangareva, we'll sail southwest to Rapa Iti and spend a couple of weeks at this intriguing island. This is as far south as we'll sail in French Polynesia, and if we were here in winter, it would be cold and windy, as we'll be below the Tropic of Capricorn at this point. However, we'll be there in summer, right about the end of June and the beginning of July, so it will be around 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21.4 Celsius.
On leaving Rapa Iti, we will sail north-northwest towards the Austral Islands of French Polynesia, arriving first at Revive Island. This island has a volcanic origin, and Mount Hero raises 437 meters, or 1,434 feet, above the ocean. We'll spend a week there before moving on to the main island of the Austral chain. By heading north, the temperatures will be back up to around 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 24.4 Celsius.
Next, we'll head west to Tupui, which is the main island of the Austral Island group, located 640 kilometers or 400 miles south of Tahiti. We'll spend another week enjoying this island before heading north to the Society Islands.
We'll stop in Papeete to provision for a 3-month stay in the Society Islands. During that time, we'll work our way west to Bora Bora, then return east up the chain and back to Papeete.
At that point, we'll be sailing against the grain, so to speak, as we must make our way back east as we return to the Tuamotu Atolls, this time visiting the northern atolls, but it's only a 2-day beat into those winds.
In our first visit to the Tuamotu Atolls, we were on our way down to the Gambier and Austral chains, followed by a long stay in the Society Islands. It just works out best for us to make this 2-day sail back upwind from Papeete, even if we must motor a bit into the wind or tack as necessary.
The reason for our 2 visits to this part of French Polynesia is that we want to end the first year of the voyage in the Tuamotu Atolls, as they're out of the typical cyclone area and have a facility that can haul out a large cat like SV Lynx.
We haven't decided yet if SV Lynx will be put on the hard or sail around the Tuamotus for the next 4 months, but some or all of the crew will be flying back to the USA for that time. It may be that we leave Brian to captain the boat. That's why I have an XO on board, and he could have some friends and family join him for that period, while the Admiral and I fly back to California to handle various obligations and see friends and family.
Regardless, the Tuamotu Atolls are where we end the first year of our voyage. When we return from the States, we'll pick up our adventures as we then turn our bow west toward Samoa, then down to the Kingdom of Tonga, west to Fiji, and south to New Zealand before arriving in Sydney, Australia, but that discussion is for a whole nother video down the line.
Let's get back to our outboard cowl and finish that up. As you can see, we've got the first coat of fairing compound on and rough sanded. So let's clean off the dust with some acetone that has a bit of steel blue added. When the acetone evaporates, it will leave a thin blue marking. After a light sanding, which removes the blue from the high spots, the remaining blue markings show us the low spots we need to fill.
Next up, Phil has to mix up a new batch of fairing compound so that he can fill in all the low spots before sanding again after it cures.
At that point, we need to do one more fine sanding to get it ready to paint.
Thanks for watching our episode about year 1 of our planned route around the planet and finishing of our modifications to the electric outboard. In our upcoming videos, we'll start building the prototypes of the batteries.
We have received all the battery cells, cases, and other battery parts. So now it's time to put them all together and start testing these prototypes of these 230 amp hour, 24 volt marine lithium batteries That way we can see how well they work. Now for that update on the fuel tank options. We're having trouble sourcing fiberglass tanks. The issue seems to be that to pass USCG testing, among other things, the tanks must handle very specific fire conditions and survive the flames for 2.5 minutes. Now, this doesn't matter much to me since my whole boat is fiberglass, and if it's on fire for 2.5 minutes, then the whole boat is likely on fire and lost. But for insurance companies to insure our boat, we need it to be USCG compliant. So that means we may have to give up on our desire for fiberglass tanks and go with the next best choice, which was polyethylene.
There were two main issues with polyethylene fuel tanks. They don't have baffles, and vapors can escape through the material, making them stink of diesel.
We have come up with solutions to handle these two problems. For the baffles, we can add foam into the tanks, which keeps them from sloshing. Alternatively, or maybe additionally, we can divide the two tanks into 4, making for less fuel volume in each one to slosh around.
As for the smells, the only thing we can do there is make sure they're in lockers that have no connections to living spaces and have some venting to the outside to clear the vapor. That way the inside of the lockers may stink, but we won't smell that inside the boat anywhere.
It's not ideal, but we may have to make it work. I still have some inquiries out, but so far, the only company that will make them for us is in Turkey, and they won't be certified to a level that makes me comfortable for the insurance company requirements.
Now, Phil will take a few questions about last week's video on the fuel tanks, and we'll give you a bit of an update on that subject as well.
All right, it's that time of week when we take a couple of questions about last week's video, which was about our fuel tanks on SV Lynx. And the first question comes from Dr. Barracuda, who said, "It looks like a design flaw on the tanks. Really should be low in the center of the hulls. Where will the water tanks go? Also, I forgot to mention that metal tanks will not burn like fiberglass." Well, he's absolutely right about the metal tanks not burning like fiberglass. In fact, that's why we ran into some trouble with finding a manufacturer who will make fiberglass tanks, because they aren't being able to pass the fire standards. So although we're not going to go with metal tanks, we are having to switch to the polyethylene tanks. But as for his question about the fuel tanks being centered and low, the issue is that with SV Lynx, the hulls are very shallow, only 2 feet draft, and fairly narrow because it's a performance cat, and that leaves only a little bit of space in the bilge below the sole. So right now, we've already used up the space we have down there to store the water tanks, and the rest of the area is under the sinks and shower where we need to do plumbing. And so we really can't put the fuel tanks there. So that is the issue there, and we've put the fuel tanks up where they're fairly centered but a little higher. But that's just of necessity. We can't really fit them down low in the holes. So we have another question from Al, who said, "What are baffles? I'm baffled." Well, baffles are walls inside of a tank with some holes through them so that water won't slosh back and forth inside the tank. They hit those walls, but the holes will allow the fuel to equalize into the various compartments created by the baffles. And so it's just to help sloshing and keep that from pounding back and forth inside the tank. And as we mentioned in the video, there are some other ways to solve that. And so in a polyethylene tank, we can put in some foam that is made for that. And it doesn't really take up much volume inside the tank, but it keeps the fuel from sloshing. And if we divide them up into multiple tanks, we cut down on the volume that sloshes back and forth. So those are a couple of the things we're going to do if we can't have baffles. So hopefully you're no longer baffled. All right, well, that's enough questions from this week's answers, and we'll get to some more next week about this video. So thanks for watching.
Well, that's the end of this week's video, but we'd like to thank our patrons, including our newest loyal patron, right down here.
By the way, we have our chat server up, and it's running for the loyal level patrons. And we've been discussing things with them about the boat in live chat. We are also replying to messages from other patrons. As promised, we've been posting the commercial-free versions of the videos in our patron-only section of the website, where they also get to access our prototype battery parts list and the full cost breakdown of our purchases to build SV Lynx. There's even more insider information in there as well.
After all, we want to make sure our patrons receive rewards for their kind support of our project and voyage around the planet.
And as always, we want to thank all of you for watching our videos. That also helps us get the boat built, splashed, and sailing.
Don't forget to leave your comments. We enjoy reading and replying. And subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon. It really helps us out.
See you next week.